Thank you very much indeed, Prime Minister. Cat Smith MP.
Thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, you've repeatedly said that the economic mission of this government is to be on the side of working people. Is that still your position?
Yes.
Yes. And do you consider farmers, many of whom are getting up at 4 a.m, working 365 days a year, feeding the nation, to be working people, yes or no?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Because last year, rural communities, including many farmers, put their trust in Labour for the very first time in a very long time and gave us a mandate for change in this country. However, and I hear this from many of the 950 farm holdings in my constituency, feel like they were misled around the changes to IHT and APR, which are going to pull the rug from underneath farming communities and obliterate the family farm for many farmers.
Picture this. Elderly farmers, some terminally ill, some who have worked the same land for 50 years, are now actively planning their own deaths to beat a tax deadline. Not a plot from some dystopian novel. Not a storyline from a grim Netflix series. This is actually happening in Britain, right now, under Sir Keir Starmer's Labour government. And the Prime Minister's response? This is sensible reform. I am not making this up. You genuinely could not write this level of tone-deaf political catastrophe if you tried. Welcome to modern Britain, where the government taxes you to death, quite literally. Quick favor, if this is already making your blood boil and you want to stay updated on all the political chaos Westminster keeps serving up, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Over 94% of you lovely lot have not subscribed yet. It is completely free. Takes about 2 seconds, and it genuinely helps us keep bringing you this content. Cheers if you did. Right, back to this absolute car crash of policy. So let us set the scene properly, shall we? Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor who apparently thinks she is some sort of economic genius despite presiding over policies that would make even Gordon Brown wince, decided in her first budget to slap inheritance tax on farms worth over £1 million. Now, before you think, oh well, millionaires should pay tax, let me explain why this is monumentally stupid and spectacularly cruel in equal measure. A farm worth £1 million is not some sprawling country estate with a manor house and a stable full of polo ponies. In most parts of Britain, £1 million barely covers the land value of a working family farm, never mind the equipment, the livestock, and the machinery needed to actually run the bloody thing. These are not wealthy landowners lounging about drinking Pimms while someone else does the work. These are families who have worked the same land for generations, where the parents get up at 4 in the morning to milk cows, where children grow up knowing every field by name, where the entire family's livelihood depends on keeping that farm operational. And now Labour, the party that supposedly stands up for working people, has decided that when those farmers die, their children will be hit with an inheritance tax bill so massive that they will have to sell the farm to pay it. Family farms, wiped out. Generations of work, destroyed. Also, Rachel Reeves can scrape together an extra £500 million a year for the Treasury. Absolutely brilliant stuff. But here's where it gets properly dark, and I mean genuinely disturbing. Reports are now emerging that elderly farmers and terminally ill farm owners are actively considering taking their own lives before April, when this tax comes into effect. Think about that for a second. People who have spent their entire lives building something, nurturing the land, raising animals, feeding the nation, are now doing calculations about whether they should die sooner rather than later to save their family from financial ruin. That is not policy. That is cruelty dressed up in a spreadsheet. Sir Keir Starmer was hauled before the Liaison Committee, which is basically where senior MPs from various committees get to grill the Prime Minister. And Cat Smith, a Labour MP, no less, asked him directly whether he was aware that terminally ill farmers are planning to expedite their own deaths. Now, this is the moment where any normal human being with even a shred of empathy would pause, maybe show a flicker of concern, perhaps suggest that if a policy is driving people to consider ending their lives early, it might be worth reconsidering. But not our Keir. Oh no. His response? I have had discussions with a number of individuals who have drawn all manner of things to my attention. All manner of things. As if farmers contemplating suicide to save their family farms is just another item on his to-do list, somewhere between approving a new roundabout in Swindon and deciding what colour tie to wear. Cat Smith did not let it drop, bless her. She pointed out that farmers who backed Labour at the last election feel completely misled, which is putting it mildly. These people voted for Labour thinking they would finally get a government that understood rural communities, that valued the people who actually produce our food. Instead, they got a government that treats them like inconvenient obstacles to revenue generation. Smith explained the situation in stark terms. Elderly farmers or those with terminal diagnoses are now in a position where if they die before April, their farm passes to the next generation tax-free. If they die after April, their family potentially loses everything. Can you imagine being in that situation? Can you imagine having to weigh up whether you should hang on to spend a few more months with your grandchildren, or whether you should go sooner to save them from bankruptcy? And what was Starmer's response to this absolutely heartbreaking scenario? I do understand the concern, but there had to be sensible reform, and I think this is sensible reform. Sensible. He used the word sensible to describe a policy that is driving terminally ill people to plan their deaths around a tax deadline. That is not sensible. That is sociopathic. That is a kind of cold, calculating political speak that makes people despise politicians. He might as well have said, yes, some of you might die a bit earlier than planned, but think of the revenue, and honestly, that would have been more honest. Victoria Atkins, the Tory Shadow Environment Secretary, absolutely tore into him, and rightfully so. She said she has repeatedly raised the tragic human cost of this cruel tax, and that Starmer cannot pretend he does not know the damage it will do. She called on him to keep his pre-election promises to farmers and axe this vindictive tax. Now, I am not usually one to give the Tories much credit these days, but on this one, Atkins is absolutely right. Labour promised farmer support before the election. They promised to understand rural communities. They promised to be different from the Conservatives. And then, the moment they got into power, they stuck the knife right in. Richard Tice from Reform UK weighed in as well, calling the tax cruel and vindictive, which frankly feels like an understatement at this point. He said family farms are the backbone of British agriculture and should be supported, not taxed to death. Taxed to death. That phrase has never been more literally accurate. Reform is positioning itself as the only party that will scrap this family farms tax. And you know what? They might just pick up a lot of rural votes because of it. When farmers feel abandoned by both Labour and the Tories, they are going to look for someone who will actually fight for them. The Countryside Alliance also chimed in, with Mo Metcalfe-Fisher calling Starmer's remarks incredibly heartless and made in defence of the indefensible. He begged the Prime Minister to stop, listen, and reflect on the outpouring of concerns from the rural community and even his own MPs. But here's the thing. Starmer does not seem particularly interested in listening. He has decided this is a policy. He has decided it is sensible, and he is ploughing ahead regardless of who gets hurt in the process. Liberal Democrat MP Alistair Carmichael, who chairs the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, made perhaps the most powerful point of the entire session. He said nobody should be left feeling that they would be better off dying between now and next April. Nobody should be in that position. It is such a basic, human observation, and yet Starmer's response was essentially, yes, well, governments have to make tough decisions. Tough decisions. As if this is some abstract economic theory, and not real people facing impossible choices about their own mortality. Carmichael pushed further, pointing out that Starmer does not even need to listen to the opposition or the farmers or the NFU. He should at least listen to his own party colleagues who are telling him this policy is a disaster. And what did Starmer say? I do listen to party colleagues all the time. Except clearly, he does not, because multiple Labour MPs have come out against this policy, and he is ignoring them completely. One Labour MP, Marcus Campbell Savers, was actually stripped of the party whip for voting against the inheritance tax plans. Let that sink in. A Labour MP voted according to his conscience, voted to protect his rural constituents, and was kicked out of the parliamentary party for it. That is not a government listening to concerns. That is a government demanding total obedience. Let us talk about the economics of this policy for a second, because it is just as nonsensical as a human cost. The government claims this will bring in around £500 million a year for the Treasury. £500 million sounds like a lot, until you realise that the UK government spends over £1 trillion a year. This inheritance tax on farms represents roughly 0.05% of total government spending. It is pocket change. It is a rounding error. And for this tiny amount of money, Labour is willing to destroy family farms, devastate rural communities, and drive people to consider ending their lives early. The cost-benefit analysis here is absolutely insane. The government keeps insisting that the changes will not affect the majority of farms, but that is misleading at best and an outright lie at worst. Yes, farms worth under £1 million are technically exempt, but in modern Britain, you would be hard-pressed to find a functioning farm worth less than that once you factor in land values. And even if it only affects a minority of farms, so what? Since when is it acceptable policy to destroy some family farms as long as you do not destroy all of them? That is like saying, do not worry, we are only burning down 30% of the houses on your street. The rest of you will be fine. What makes this even more galling is that Labour campaigned on being the party of working people. Farmers are working people. They work harder than most people in Westminster could ever imagine. They deal with unpredictable weather, volatile markets, endless regulations, and razor-thin profit margins. They produce the food we eat, maintain the countryside we love, and keep rural communities alive. And this is how Labour rewards them, with a tax that treats their life's work as just another asset to be liquidated for government revenue. The Daily Express has been running a campaign called Save Britain's Family Farms, calling for a complete U-turn on this policy. They are right to do so. This is not a left-right issue. This is not about Labour versus Conservative. This is about whether we value the people who feed us, whether we respect generational farming families, and whether we think it is acceptable for government policy to push people toward considering their own deaths as a financial planning strategy. Starmer had a chance in that committee hearing to show some humanity, to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, if a policy is having these kinds of consequences, it needs rethinking. But instead, he doubled down. He insisted it was sensible reform. He suggested that governments have to make tough decisions. He essentially told farmers, yes, I hear you, but I am doing it anyway. That is not leadership. The backlash against this policy is only going to grow. Rural communities are angry. Farmers are organizing. Even Labour MPs are breaking ranks. And Reform UK is hovering in the background, ready to hoover up every rural vote that Labour is throwing away with both hands. Starmer seems to think he can weather this storm, that eventually people will forget and move on to the next controversy.